think that anybody that has any interest in nature and natural history has at some time been inspired by Charles Darwin and what he found during his visit to the Galapagos Islands. I certainly was. This is a strange, beautiful, remarkable place. The word unique absolutely applies here. There are so many creatures that exist nowhere else on Earth. The proximity of these animals, the degree to which they lack fear, that you can just stand next to them and they just look at you or ignore you, is unlike anything anywhere in the world. It will never leave you if you go to the Galapagos Islands. You will have stories for the rest of your life, I promise you. Since my first visit to the Galapagos Islands in 1966, and I remember vividly the first time I went there, how extraordinary it was, how surprised I was, how delighted I was at more or less everything I saw. Every single time I've been to this extraordinary place, it amazes me. It's the most remarkable place on Earth. I believe that we offer a really, really compelling and interesting way to go there for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that we've been doing this for a very long time, back since 1966. And so we have come to understand the islands, understand the opportunities, understand what people are looking for, I believe perhaps better than anybody out there.
I just really like to see how the funds provided by Lindblad National Geographic is enabling us to work with the park and with other organizations, and just seeing how tourism is really benefiting the work of these institutions and how it's integrated into the society here in Galapagos.
Fully a third of the Galapagos Marine Reserve was declared a no-take zone, meaning that there is no extraction of any kind. This is huge from the perspective of creating really, really significant resilience in the marine system. So we're engaged on a multitude of fronts, and we partner with a multitude of organizations to try and ensure that there is significant impact as to the needs that exist here. And there are many, and they will be many in the years to come. And we want to be front and center in helping them figure out how to best conserve these islands, give them the right kind of protection, work with the human communities so that they have the opportunity to thrive here in the islands that they call home.
Hello, I'm Congresswoman Bernice Johnson. I chair the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee. Let me begin by thanking the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation for hosting Capitol Hill Ocean Week. CHOW's focus on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in ocean and Great Lakes conservation is a necessary and welcome component of environmental justice. We are at a critical juncture in our nation for both environmental stewardship and addressing issues of systemic racism and oppression. And we must therefore pursue climate and ocean solutions that are also equitable and just. This can be achieved by rebuilding a scientific workforce that is representative of the diversity of America. Right now in the U.S., Black students represent less than 2% of graduates in earth, atmospheric, and ocean sciences. In March of this year, the majority staff of the House Science Committee published a report on the federal scientific workforce. It found that less than 4% of NOAA scientists are Black, and only 1.3% are Black women. Clearly, a lot of work remains to ensure diverse representation in these fields. But as studies suggest, increasing diversity in STEM fields, including ocean sciences, will help strengthen scientific collaborations. These innovative solutions are necessary to address the great challenges we face globally and as a nation. I'm the first African American and the first woman to chair this committee in its 60-year history. Throughout my tenure in Congress, I have prioritized issues related to building the STEM pipeline. This includes my commitment to improving diversity, equity, and inclusion within our federal scientific workforce. Codifying my bipartisan STEM opportunities and MSA STEM achievement bills which just passed in the House, would be critical steps in this direction. Additionally, my staff is working on a bill to advance our national ocean exploration and science priorities. I hope this legislation will help support a diverse and inclusive ocean exploration enterprise. I look forward to working with my colleagues to advance these important issues through Congress, and I thank you for the opportunity to provide these remarks.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and hopefully you are close to a little bit of ocean. I am Whitney Tome. I'm principal and head of the Beyond Diversity Strategies practice at the Raben Group, and I am honored and delighted and, to be honest, humbled by the panel I'm about to introduce. I have the joy of having a conversation, as one of our panelists just said, with family. Just thinking about my own career in the ocean field and recognizing that this panel will actually probably be the most diverse ocean panel I've maybe ever been on. And it's a moment that I think hopefully encapsulates the vision and the joy that I want to continue to see in oceans. I am joined by Andreas Jimenez, Dr. Quentin Tyler, Jalone White-Newsome, Francisco Olivares, Leonard Pale, and Shante Coleman. And we're going to have, hopefully, a really robust and delightful conversation. But I want to set the container first and then ask our panelists a couple of questions. And I'm going to set the container by telling a story, which is of my own introduction to oceans. And I have a grandfather to thank for that, who was the first one who took me out on the beach and got my toes wet, and then also told me of a story of caution, which is when he actually had to save one of his children from the ocean who jumped in before she had learned fully how to swim. And it told me two things. One, his passion and care for the ocean, his passion and care for his family, but also that with that story and then the subsequent afternoon we spent, he started teaching me how to swim. And it was one of those moments that brought me a love of the salt water of the ocean, the feeling of it between my toes, and also the need to protect it and to love it and to care for it. And so what I'm hoping through this conversation is you get both the passion and love that these incredible 6 people have about the ocean, but also their vision for what ocean equity and ocean justice truly looks like, and how do we actually start building towards that future. I'd also like to take a moment to really thank all of you for joining us, and look forward to also hearing some of your questions if we have a little bit of time at the end. So Andreas, I'm going to start with you and ask you sort of how you got here. What have you, your career, your span of career landed you into the place you are now, but also where you have come from and what you can apply to ocean spaces from your previous life and career and experience.
Whitney, great to see you as always. Thank you to the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation and everyone on this panel. Like you said, Whitney, it is amazing to be on this diverse panel. And so, yeah, let's run through a little bit about what got me here. I was born in Bogota, Colombia, and moved to the United States and grew up in West Virginia. So why is that important? One is I got the joy of growing up in a beautiful country and being able to travel back to where I was born, enjoying the ocean in Cartagena, then coming back here and being able to go to places in Florida, nearby in Ocean City. And really it was a time in West Virginia, and a time where your parents would send you out and you would run and explore the woods, go by the Potomac, go fishing, and absolutely just take in everything from nature. And you just were, it was a great time. The only time you had to come home was when your parents said, it's getting dark, it's time for bed, and you would do it all over again. And so a real strong passion for the environment, both going back to Colombia as a child and in my teenage years, and then also growing up in West Virginia. I had the honor and privilege of working at Ocean Conservancy, where I spent 3 years really invested in ocean acidification and fishery management, working on these issues, making sure that we weren't overfishing, making sure that we weren't making our oceans acidic, because that impacts shell life. It impacts everything from the livelihood of fishermen to the communities to tourism. And if we don't protect our oceans, we won't have those wonderful spaces to be able to go to. As you mentioned, Whitney, in your opening story of your grandfather out by the ocean and having those wonderful moments, if we're not caring and protecting and investing, then we're going to be missing out on those moments. And the more diverse backgrounds that we can get interested in prioritizing these important issues, the better it's going to be for all of us. Because Whitney, you absolutely know, and so does everyone on this panel, that unless we have these diverse, amazing backgrounds coming in and working on these important issues of conservation, of keeping the oceans clean, keeping plastics out of them, we're not going to have a clean ocean for future generations to enjoy the way we have.
Thank you, Andreas. Dr. Quentin Tyler, please.
Yes, so thank you, Whitney, and thank you for my previous colleague for his perspective. But again, I come from the agriculture and natural resource space, and I would love to have this amazing story, that I originated and grew up on a family farm, but I did not. I wasn't exposed to natural resources, but I had a mentor that exposed me to that. And one of the challenges that came forward was the lack of representation. There were several times throughout my collegiate and professional career where I was the only one. There was several times where I experienced, discrimination, experienced prejudice. And that led me to my current career trajectory. As now I am the director at Michigan State Extension and also an associate dean and director for diversity, equity, inclusion. As we talk about, ocean policy, I look at it in the same as, the ag and natural resource field. The importance of having multiple voices at the table, the importance of welcoming folks, not only having those folks at the table, but letting those folks voice their concerns and learning from their perspectives as well. So thank you, Whitney.
Thank you, Dr. Tyler. Jalon Wait-Newsom.
Yes, thank you so much, Whitney, and for all of you all being here today. I'm going to start off saying that I'm calling from the original lands of the Potawatomi in southeastern Michigan from my home here. And I feel like that's important because where I come from is not only the place where I'm sitting, but it's also the fact that I come from a father who fought for justice in the courtrooms, a mom who continues to advocate for folks that don't have a voice in Detroit and across this country. And also, I grew up playing in the Rouge River in Detroit, taking water samples, where that was my first connection to the environment, first understanding of environmental injustice, and the role that I wanted to play as a human on this earth. So I've been fortunate that that legacy, coupled with my passion for science and protecting the environment and advancing the health for people, particularly low-income communities and communities of color, has provided such wonderful work opportunities, both professionally and on a volunteer basis. And what I've seen kind of working across these different spaces, whether it be advocacy, as a scientist, as a researcher, as an engineer, in philanthropy, is that, we have a lot of work to do. And particularly as it relates to this notion of policy, the time I spent at WEAC for Environmental Justice as the first director of federal policy in the DC office, I feel like whether you're talking about equitable ocean policy or policies in general, there's a lot of lessons, but I will share maybe three briefly that I think is relative to this conversation. The first is we must understand who science and policy are meant to serve. Part of my consulting practice now is transforming communities to keep solutions people-centered. And if we don't keep people at the center, then that's the problem. The second piece is that we must understand who needs to be crafting the research and the policy agenda. It has to be the people that are most impacted. The third is that we have to understand that unintentional consequences can occur when a policy is implemented. And it's not just enough to have an equity lens because you can take the lenses off, but you have to have an equity analysis that really looks at all the pieces of that solution. So again, the right people at the right time in the right process, and keeping people at the center of solution will, I think, get us to equitable ocean policy and equity across all policies.
Thank you, John. Paco?
Thank you so much, Whitney. It's a pleasure to be here. My preferred pronoun is he, him, and I was born in Mexico City, which is also a landlocked location and a very interesting place to become a marine biologist. But I did have the fortune that my parents took us on camping trips to the beach a lot, and that's where I definitely developed that appreciation, and that's what my current career does. I'm the outgoing executive director for Green Leadership Trust, and I'm calling you from the ancestral lands of the original Shawnee tribe in Ohio. So I believe the problems of climate change and ocean pollution, as Andres alluded earlier, are so big that it takes everybody in society to be involved. It will take all sectors, like Jalan mentioned, both philanthropy, government, and nonprofit, which is where I come from, to be involved and, of course, to be represented. So I appreciate this opportunity to share some of those ideas, some of that vision. Green Leadership Trust builds the power of boards and environmental groups by increasing representation of diverse voices in these boards. These people are the fiduciary agents to these organizations. They decide on strategic decisions, on budgeting, allocation, on partnerships. So it will take all of us, and I appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you, Paco. Leonard?
Yeah, so I had an interesting experience. A couple of months ago, I connected with a friend of mine from elementary school who got to chatting, and she informed me that she remembered that I wanted to be a marine biologist back in kindergarten. This field has been one that I've always wanted to be part of. I've enjoyed it all the way through to today. I am passionate about the work we do at Schmidt Ocean Institute, making science available to people all around the world, doing world-class science and taking the Falcor to unknown oceans and unknown depths. One of the comments that was brought up earlier focused on people-centered, and that really spoke to me. I think that the people on this panel, the people who would be in this room if we were in DC at CHOW, have an opportunity to reach back to other students, other mentees, and to help bring them up. And I think that a lot of the issues we're facing with diversity and bringing others into this space are to be addressed by us, by me, by the members on this panel, and everybody listening. And one way that that can be addressed is to reach back and to identify a person or persons that you can connect with and actually stay with that person throughout their career. The mentors that have helped guide me and have been part of my life are the reason I'm here today. And I strongly suggest that that is something that we can all do to help improve DEI issues.
Thank you, Leonard. Shantae, would you mind closing us out on this question?
Sure, I would be happy to, Whitney. It is such a pleasure to be here today. I wanted to say hello to my friends and my future friends. My name is Shantae Coleman, and I'm the Vice President of Equity and Justice at the National Wildlife Federation. And so similar to Whitney, I grew up in San Diego exploring my local beaches and waterways. So ever since I was a kid, I had such a fascination with water. And this led to a lot of my hobbies today that I still enjoy, like swimming, surfing, fishing, and especially scuba diving. When I was in law school, my first internship was at San Diego Coastkeeper, where I got to spend a lot of time on boats working to detect poaching in marine protected areas off the coast. And this is when I realized that I could make a living protecting and conserving what I absolutely love. So I took a leap of faith a few years ago, 6 years ago to be exact, when NWF was hiring for a Chesapeake Bay water policy position at CHOW Clean Water Coalition. And I moved to Annapolis, sight unseen. I had never visited before, but I looked at photos and there was a lot of water, so I figured it was going to work out okay. And then a few years ago, I transitioned into my role working on something that's very near and dear to my heart, which is equity, inclusion, and justice. And really, as folks already mentioned, it's about centering people in our work. What I have learned from my experience is that we work in a field that is not very inclusive. It's not inclusive of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. It's not inclusive of LGBTQIA+ folks and many other folks with marginalized identities. And when exclusion happens, this actively denies us the ability to do our best to work, so that all of our efforts we make in ocean and water policy must center marginalized people. And in my mind, that's not something that we can be neutral on. It's something that we have to be active on. And I've thought a little bit about the word centering. A few folks on the panel mentioned this word already. And to me, centering really means, one, creating affirming spaces, two, challenging the status quo by doing things that are countercultural and counterstructural, and then three, asking and then acting on the needs identified by marginalized folks. So I just wanted to share that, and I have an example of that if we have time later, but for now I'll pass it back to Whitney.
Thank you. I think you all set up just a really beautiful set of storytelling, and thank you for sharing your stories and how you got into this or what you've experienced over the course of your early life into career. I think for me, Leonard, I'm going to pull on your question a little bit to think about the next one, which is you said, like, sort of look back, pull back on the people behind you. I want to take a minute to also think about go forward. So to think about what is the forward vision, what is the future, what do you want ocean policy and the ocean policy space to look like, to be like? As Shantae said, what's that culture shift, that change, that dynamic that we need to recreate and maybe potentially dismantle and start again of what ocean policy really needs to look like and who are the people in it? And so what I'd love to hear is a little bit of your vision. Paco, we'll start with you and then go to Jalan and then Quentin, and then I'll keep going.
Well, thank you so much, Whitney. I echo what Shantae was mentioning. That intentionality is what is very important. And the ancestral knowledge is there. It's only our modern history of the conservation movement that has excluded this knowledge. We know historically anglers and hunters were setting aside these spaces in the United States, but that doesn't work. And so I call it radical intentionality. It has to be proactive, it has to be consistent, it has to be every day. And so that is kind of like going beyond just checking off a box. It is willing to listen, willing to give up power in some spaces. I think NGOs play that very vital role between government policies. The Biden administration is doing great with suggesting a few policies now, but how that translates into society and how the knowledge of society comes to the upper reaches of government. And nonprofits play a vital role there. So for me, is moving away from the traditional stakeholders that make the decisions to having this radical, consistent intentionality.
Jalan, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I love that radical intentionality, Paco. I'm gonna have to use that and give you credit. So I have a lot of dreams and aspirations, but I would say the first is that I want my two daughters, who are 12 and 14 years old right now, not to ever have to feel like they are the lonely only. And I really resonated when the Congresswoman said, I think less than 2% of science, folks in the science field are Black, and less than 1.3% are Black women. And I remember how I felt when I graduated from undergrad at Northwestern in chemical engineering. Started out with 5 women of color. By the end of those 4 years, it was only me. And that was not cool. It was not cool to be the lonely only. I felt that in many ways, sometimes the institutions that we're in fail us and did not provide the support and whatever folks needed to get through that. And I bring up that experience because I think it parallels exactly what we're talking about today, whether it's the ocean space, ocean policy, like the workforce needs to represent the diversity, the beautiful diversity, racial, ethnic, experiential diversity of the folks that are in this world. And I think about my work in philanthropy that was probably more so related to water and trying to transform systems to make sure that water leaders, water decision makers, water advocates were representative, again, of the diversity of our world. And so I think one of the things as we talk about more equitable workforces and equitable policy is that, bringing on, I think, Leonard's point of mentorship is so critical. We have to lay that foundation and let our babies know that they can see themselves in these positions in the future. And if you don't see anybody that looks like you, need to find somebody. So we have to make sure that we're pulling folks up with us. I think, again, embracing and acknowledging the genius of communities, particularly our communities that have been unable to access the Great Lakes where I live, unable to see an ocean. We have kids that have not seen oceans and unable to really, live and love water in a way. Like, we have to make sure that those voices are heard and folks have access. Because I believe that's really just one of the couple of steps to really getting to equitable policy and equitable workforce and really the equitable world and future that we want to see.
Thank you, John. Dr. Tyler?
Yeah, so I think, Whitney, at the beginning of this panel, you talked about this being one of the most diverse panels. And to me, it shouldn't be an outlier. It should be something of consistency. Should we always have multiple perspectives and voices at the table? In addition to that, again, it's about appreciating, land and water acknowledgments for different groups. To me, it's also about partnering, with multiple societies that focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Again, I'm going to bring in my background as a member and former national president of Minorities in Ag, Natural Resource, and Related Sciences. Those individuals, those groups have representation all across the country, and those are voices that need to be heard. So again, it's the inclusion of those multiple groups. Also, in collaboration with our universities, in particular, the extension services who are at the grassroots level. We have 4-H and youth development as a mainstay in educating youth at an early age. And then also, again, just trusting and partnering with diversity, equity, inclusion specialists at our colleges and universities to make the true change.
Thank you. Shantae, what's your vision?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Whitney. These are fantastic answers so far. Everyone's so inspiring. I love Paco brought up the point around power, and I wanted to touch on that specifically. I feel like if the ocean policy space and Great Lakes policy spaces were inclusive and equitable, it would feel different because the power would be shifted to those who are currently adjacent to power and adjacent to power structures. And right now, power sort of naturally flows and congregates in the same places, and shifting it takes very, Paco, what did you say, radical intention? Like it's intentional action, right? We have to actively work to make this shift. And I talked about what it means to center earlier. If we were going to center marginalized people, we need to take a hard look at where power is going in the system and be ready to really deeply question that. And so at NWF, we are analyzing how power flows through our racial equity transformation team. And we were seeing the same mostly white male leaders that had concentrated power, especially related to decision making and money. And we started to shift this by dismantling our previous leadership team, which happened earlier this year, and creating a process to establish a new leadership team with staff that brought strong equity competencies and really the type of leadership that we were looking for in a time of transformational change and growth, which was not the same leadership that we needed before. And so this team isn't just highest levels of leadership, it's much more diverse than that in a variety of ways, from positional power to race, tenure, age, and more. At the same time, we're elevating our leaders of color into leadership positions in the organization, making sure BIPOC people have a seat at the table, and then increasing transparency around how decisions are made. So with all of that, it increases the understanding of how power works, while at the same time shifting power to those who have been most marginalized. And in my vision, folks who have been most marginalized and adjacent to power would have more power.
Thank you. Andreas.
All great, wonderful answers, totally on point. I'm just going to build on what everyone says. Whitney, I think you know where I'm going to go with this. Culture change. There needs to be a culture change within organizations and foundations. We need to make sure that we're setting up people of color for success. We cannot look at organizations and foundations and say in 2021 or ever, it's okay for you not to be open about your hiring practices. It's not okay to say, I set up a task force and that's enough. We've checked the box. It's not okay to say, we hired a DEI person on our team and so we're good here. That is not good. That is not good at all. We need to make sure that organizations are putting diversity into their strategic mission. You can't just talk about it. Put it on paper, write it down, incorporate it into your mission, make it part of who you are moving forward. If you are not being transparent when it comes to your hiring practices on staff and board, we have a huge problem. If you are being transparent and those numbers aren't what they should be, you need to do better. We need to make sure that organizations and foundations are always trying to work on this issue and not saying, oh, this is the issue of the moment, or it's on TV a lot, so now we have to work on it for now. We need to make sure and hold organizations and foundations accountable at all moments. They need to be held accountable today, tomorrow, and throughout. We need to be looking at their retention, their hiring practices. How does a person of color actually move up in an organization? We need to be looking at all of these important things to make sure that we're setting up people of color for success in the environmental sector. If we don't, and it's been mentioned a couple of times, youth who are so passionate about environmental issues, ocean issues, they're going to look at this field and say, I don't have a voice there. They don't care. I don't see someone like me in this role, whatever role that is, scientist, communication, VP, and they are going to take their passion elsewhere. We need to be working for a better future, and we need to be working so that the youth see leaders of color, that they see themselves in these roles. And it's up to us on this panel and up to everyone who's watching to make sure that happens. This can't just be an issue of the moment. It needs to be something that's worked on 365 days a year across the board, with all organizations, foundations, and Congress all working to make this happen.
Thank you, Andreas. Leonard, your vision?
Agree with everything that everyone has said. I'm going to build on just a couple of points that Paco brought up. Sustaining. We have got to sustain this momentum. A lot of this conversation is coming up these days because it's hitting headlines. Next year, the headlines could be different, but the work we're doing here must be sustained and continued. And the question was kind of my dream and vision for all of this. In addition to seeing cultures represented, I'd like to see other disciplines represented. When scientists go out on Falcor, when the work comes into us as proposals, the thing that really gets me excited is seeing so many different scientific disciplines, technology disciplines, groups from around the world. I'd like to see this as a global movement, a global representation being included. Yeah, I'll stop there. That would be my vision, would be that it would not just be DEI in the US, that this is a global effort, and it's not just ocean sciences, that it's all science, all technology, all disciplines.
Thank you all for that wonderful vision. I might add a little to it just because as I had the privilege of listening to you all, one actually reminds me of an incredible professor who's now at Yale, Gerald Torres. And I always think about the land and sea connection that we often lose track of in a lot of this work. We focus just on oceans or just on land, but there's this beautiful and incredibly important interconnection between the two. And what my vision is that anyone who wants to enter this field can enter it and span those two things in any way their heart desires. But also they can grow and build in an organization or build their own organization to meet the challenges that we have and that we see in this field, knowing that we are tackling, as you said, Leonard, global problems, right? This isn't simply like a US challenge, but oceans are the lifeblood of our planet. And are we taking care of them like we do, hopefully, humans, as you talked about, Jalan? Like, are we centering people, but also are we centering the earth and the environment as much as we are our humans? And it reminds me of, who is it? Kelsey Leonard of the Shinnecock Nation, who considers water a person. And to think of a radical way in which we actually think about the environment as having its own being, as being its own thing that we need to respect and love and shepherd as much as we do ourselves. And so how do we bring all of that to this work? So that's what I often think of, a little bit of the vision. That's my hope and dream when my kids, like Jalan's, when my kids are really entering this space, that they can see anything is possible given what they are. So thank you all for those incredible visions. I'm going to go to our final question that I'm going to incorporate a little of audience questions, because one came in that I think fits perfectly with our next question, which is, okay, you all articulated a vision. How in the world are we getting there? And I'd love to hear from all of you some tangible and practical ways that we can start moving towards that. Shantae, I'll begin with you, but I'm also going to add a little detail for you, Shantae, which is, as you especially think about, the Black, Indigenous people of color, how are you also specifically hiring, promoting them at NWF, and what are some practical ways you're doing that, along with the broader work that you're doing on power?
That is a fantastic question. Well, let me tackle the first part of the question, which is, how do we make the dreams a reality? This work is exhausting. It's very tiring, especially if you're a change agent. So for me, it's like a lot of napping and a lot of yoga and a lot of just being in my body to like get through some of these tough moments of discomfort. And the deeper we go and the more that we challenge power, the harder the work gets. And so I think the tangible action is to ensure like wellness and care for your change agents, especially since so many change agents are people of color. We need specific support. At NWF, we're doing this in a few ways. I would say one, we're trying to broaden the number of change agents that we have. And we're doing that through trainings and skill building. We're also providing additional wellness options, like we have open wellness now. So if you need time, you take time, and it's not a big deal. We're also doing a few weeks off this summer, like half-day Fridays. We're also investing, this is something we thought about recently. A lot of our BIPOC staff in particular were saying that they couldn't take time off because they were the only lead on their program area and they have deliverables. So we're actually now investing in additional capacity for BIPOC-led teams so that those folks can actually take advantage of the wellness time that we're providing and actually step away from work. So I would just say, in addition, as we're all thinking about the future of work and how we work and where we work and when we work, it's a really important time to listen to people and what they need, listen to our staff and what they need, and then act on those needs. So I think there's just different ways that we need to work going forward to sustain ourselves in this work. And then Whitney, can you tell me the second question again?
Absolutely.
I think it was around promotional practices.
Yeah, hiring and promoting, especially Black, Indigenous people of color.
Yeah, so I would say that we're, in a way, not focused on hiring, right? We're focused on culture change. And with culture change will come retention of our talent. And so we know that at NWF, we retain white staff for over 4 years and staff of color for less than 2. So to me, that says our culture is not inclusive and folks don't want to stay. And so we're really taking a hard look at our human resources policies and practices, the wellness things I shared. How can we get our diverse talent to really want to stay at the organization? So we've really been putting a lot of our efforts into retention versus hiring. And while we have worked through equitable hiring practices and we have a new way that we do hire, I would say the majority of our time is spent internally on our culture change so that when we do hire people, they will stay with us.
Thank you, Shantae. That's wonderful to hear. Leonard, what are some tangible things that you want to recommend?
So I'll jump in first with something tangible that we at SOI are doing. We put out a call to some 600 or so of our past alumni and folks who've been involved in research with SOI over the past 10 years to ask them what we can do to help support scientists and to help support science on Falcor. And we've got a whole bunch of different ideas and we're working through those now. But we are starting a pilot program to support families, to support scientists who have families back home. And we're looking to roll that out in the coming weeks and really excited about doing that. And something that Shantae said, I think really resonated with me, and that would be something that has worked for me and that I would recommend to others. And that's having a network or a fallback group, having other people in this space to help you recharge, because fighting the good fight really can get tiring. And it's really helpful to have a group of people, whether they're in your own specific discipline or if it's just friends who you can vent with and share ideas with, I think is really, really important.
Paco, any thoughts from Green Leadership Trust?
Yeah, well, Green Leadership Trust has developed a few tools to hold leadership accountable. We have a CEO evaluation tool. We have a best practices document in terms of how to diversify your board. We also are ready to have fellow board members present at other board meetings when the idea of diversifying and centering equity is not there yet. So by listening from peers, it goes a longer way. So we are available. I think thinking outside the box in terms of some of the recruitment, going to HBCU, historically Black colleges and universities. There's also the Environmental Leaders Program, Ray Fellowship Program for training and building that pipeline of knowledge. So just bringing up BIPOC and people of color up the ranks, all the way to in my case, a board member, which has the highest influence on an organization. That I think would definitely help out a lot. And Andres had mentioned some things about some characteristics of white supremacy culture, which is the paternalistic, the time sensitive, time stressed about deliverables, the individualistic nature. We just need to combat all of these symptoms with which frankly we don't need to reinvent the wheel. The ancestral knowledge tells us to be collective, to use love and humility, to work as a team and with compassion. So I think all of those lessons, we can just go back to them, and in a way, that's how we are influencing culture.
Thank you, Paco. Andreas.
First off, what is this from NWF? I hear some extra vacation days in the summer. That sounds all right. We gotta check that out. That's great. So at Green 2.0, we're doing a lot. So we're spotlighting organizations because we want to hear from organizations and what they're doing, how they're prioritizing diversity. NWF just came out on Monday with our latest spotlight. We're so proud and excited to have them. So check out our website, diversegreen.org, and learn more about what we're doing. We do guest blogs with organizations and individuals so that people can learn and understand what's happening internally with organizations or foundations. We have tons of reports, Whitney, you know this. We got our annual report card. We are shifting and making it a little different, building on all of the amazing success that you've built on and past leaders have. Normally, we looked at the top 40 foundations and organizations. This year, we're taking away that top 40. We are opening it up. We have an opt-in option for organizations and for organizations to be open about their hiring and board practices. We're saying, come on in, small, medium, large organizations. We want to hear from you. So there are zero excuses. I don't want to hear we're too small, so we can't work on these issues. We're in the middle. Or, oh, I lucked out, I'm number 41, and so I don't have to do this. Thank goodness. No, everyone is going to be added in. We're adding 80 groups this year. You can opt in on Twitter or check out our website. And then on the foundation front, doing it completely different. We're going to take a big risk. Let's see how it goes. We're asking foundations not to be open about their hiring practices. When we looked at the report last year, 37 out of 40 organizations were open. How many foundations? Not too many. 11 out of 40. Not doing great foundations. So we're saying, you don't want to be open? That's fine. You do you. What we're going to do is we're going to go after the money. Are foundations actually giving to organizations that are run by, led by, and for people of color? Are they giving, and I'll underline this, equally? Are they giving equally? For the past year and a half, I've heard nothing but foundations say, well, we're going to pledge on diversity issues. We pledge that we're doing this and that. Well, we're going to find out, Whitney, if they're actually pledging, if the money's actually going where they're saying it's going. So we're gonna change that. That report card comes out in November. We have the first of its kind, a pathway to actually how to answer and look at diversity questions internally. It is a roadmap that we're putting up at the end of July, the first of its kind again. So it is going to be a roadmap, and we're saying, take all of it, use some of it, or just look at it and don't use any of it. But there isn't anything out there for organizations and foundations to say, this is how we should properly be looking at these questions. And so why not have a resource guide? Why not put it out there for free? We also do, and I promise I'm almost done. We started a fellowship, so we're mentoring, we're bringing folks in, but most importantly, we're paying them. I have always said I would rather not start an internship or a fellowship if we don't pay them. I was one of those interns at one point who had to run past the person in front of me at the metro because I didn't have enough money at the end of the month. I get it. I've been there. So we pay them $6,000 for 3 months. You can apply to be a fellow on our career page. Our career page. We started a free career page so that folks know exactly the kind of organizations that are looking for diverse candidates. It's free because everything we do, as long as I'm executive director, will always be free resources. None of that you have to pay $5 or you have to do this, that, or the other. No, these are free resources on our website that we will always offer for free. And these are some of the things we're doing, and we plan on doing lots more. So come check us out. Thank you, Whitney.
Andreas, thanks for making me smile. It's always nice to see what's the next horizon for Green 2.0, and it's honestly just a joy to be able to now watch and be like, they're doing it. I'd love to hear on this question, Quentin and Jolan, in that order. What do you see as some tactical things you're putting in place and doing to make this dream a reality?
So Whitney, first I would say is for leadership in our respective organizations to send the message that diversity, equity, inclusion is valuable. I think also is to have it in our evaluation processes. And then also just the realization that diversity, equity, inclusion is not simply on the shoulders of those folks that are marginalized, minoritized, or oppressed. Again, I think, for my work, it's understanding the importance of accomplices in this work and folks that don't look like me. I think, as I think about my own trajectory, right, it's those folks that are in the room when I'm not in the room, that can speak on my behalf. As you think about, our position descriptions, right, can we be intentional in highlighting the experiences of those who are underrepresented backgrounds? And to me, that doesn't seek out or, exclude certain individuals, but talk about, what those folks do bring to the table. In addition to that, as we talk about continuous learning and development, and not learning and development in the ways that we've done in the past. One of the things that we've done at Michigan State is create a virtual reality app that replicates marginalized, minoritized, or oppressed folks on our college campuses. We also replicated a building, and where you can talk and have a safe space to talk about situations and scenarios and how you can be an accomplice in this particular work. It's also being intentional and partnering again with professional societies and organizations and different colleges and universities, whether they're from 1890, 1994, or even an 1862 background. It's understanding that, and also being intentional in our pre-college programs for various backgrounds, which we have at Michigan State. And again, it's all about also rewarding and highlighting those that do this work. One of the things we have done at Michigan State is reward and highlight folks that create a sense of belonging. Also, departments and units at certain levels, they have their own DEI committees. They have their own efforts in DEI, which we reward those folks as well. So again, it's a multitude of things, committing resources, highlighting folks, and also integrating diversity, equity, inclusion, I think it was said before, into our mission and our value systems.
Jalon?
Yeah, so I love that, Dr. Clinton, and everybody. I was like taking profuse notes, but 4 months ago, I started my consulting practice, Empowering a Green Environment and Economy, and words mean a lot, and I'm all into power, so thank you, Shante. But a couple of things that I'm working on specifically is one around institutional change. And what I've learned is that regardless if you're a nonprofit, if you're a utility, if you're a small organization, there are always some institutional barriers that keep you from reaching this aspirational goal of equity in your process and outcomes. And so what I've been working with folks in Canada and across the country is really, how do you embed equity into your policies and practices? So you not just have like this cute little statement on your website, but what does that actually mean? How do you begin to change culture? But most importantly, how do you evaluate yourself and hold yourself accountable and make sure that it's not just the folks within your organization that are looking at this scorecard or whatever you want to say, but also the folks outside, the folks that you're supposed to be serving externally, also have their own scorecard and can call you when you're not doing what you're supposed to do. So that's been a lot of my work, again, across different sectors and different entities. I'd also say in terms of the foundation world, because I just left that world, I'm having an opportunity to work with a couple of clients that are really looking at their current grant making strategies. And again, this is not rocket science to anybody, but how do you actually get money directly to Black, Indigenous, people of color led, women led organizations? I'm not going to say it's simple, but I think the excuses and the policies and practices that we've allowed to exist over time, it's time out for that. So really working with foundations that, again, are making these commitments, but trying to actually operationalize that, which is, I think, the issue. We can all have good intentions, but until you actually get in there and look at your process and ask, why are we doing this? Why are we not doing this? That's when the change starts to happen. I would also say one of the things is that we have to begin to remove this deficit mindset. I get so frustrated when there's like this thing that low-income communities of color, and folks that have experienced environmental injustices, that they have nothing to offer of value, that the community is just an environmental justice community. Again, there's so much value, there's so much experience, there's so much power, and I think we need to change the narrative as we think about this broader change around equity and what we're looking towards. But I would say personally, I think spending time with people that are not like you helps get us closer to what we're trying to achieve. So not just hanging out with folks that feel and know the same things, but learning from each other, valuing each other's perspectives. I think advocacy, wherever you're sitting at, I tell my daughters, I tell my parents, like wherever you're sitting, whether you're sweeping the floors of Starbucks or you're sitting in a government seat, you can be an advocate where you are. And those little changes that you can push can, again, lead to larger impact. And then I think one of the important things, Shante, which I took, was really the importance of mental health. That is something that I think we're hearing a lot more about, but has not been valued, paid for, time taken for, within our community, particularly in communities of color. So I would say if we're going to actually reach this equity aspiration that we're shooting for, we have to make sure that we take care of ourselves, because if we don't, who's going to be here to do the work?
Thank you all. And I think you raised a few good points, and I'm going to go to an audience question in just a second. But I want to get to the point around the scarcity versus abundance mentality. And, when you said that, it really is so embedded in what I feel like ocean policy is right now, right? Which is like we are, fear of the planet, of how we're going to degrade it, of how we're going to pull it apart, right? But also thinking what's the corollary for how do we think about an abundance mentality? How do we really push out to say, like, what if we have an abundant planet? What if we have abundant resources? What if we have abundant knowledge? To really flip that mindset into something very different so that we aim for the goal rather than continuing to get into that place of scarcity and less. But how do we have more? I've got one or two audience questions that I want to pull on and then open it up for anyone to tackle. The first one is around actually employee resource groups. And somebody just wants to know sort of how people view them in both changing culture, but also pushing people into silos, but don't quite have the same true corporate change. Shantae, I might go to you maybe as a start for this one, but open it up for others as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So we at NWF, we do have an employee resource group program. We have a framework that we use that I'd be happy to share with anyone who's interested, because it's really important sort of legally how you set up ERGs is what we call them. But I want to give an example of, we've talked a lot about power, of how employee resource groups can shift power within the organization or have done so in NWF. So our Black Employee Resource Group, which I'm a member of, we spent the better part of 2020 developing, fine-tuning, and elevating policy recommendations for like internal equity changes, including improving wellness and inclusion practices at NWF. And leadership received these recommendations, acted on many of them, and continues to move several of them forward. And they included some really big steps for us that improved our culture and improved our wellness practices. So the first really big one, we talked about making sure to pay people for their work. We did a pay equity audit, and this led to a significant dollar amount of compensation adjustments and promotions for BIPOC staff who weren't being paid at equity with white staff. This also led to us securing trauma counseling for all of our staff. Like this last year has been really, really hard. And so we have counseling available to our staff. And we also have additional paid wellness benefits. We just got these little like TWIC cards, that's what they're called, TWIC, and it's $300, and we can use them on any sort of wellness that we would like. I'm actually going to use mine on massages. I just scheduled one yesterday. And it also led to us centering our investment process on BIPOC-led programs and environmental justice. For the first time in NWF history, we had a transparent process around investment requests in the organization that led to our BIPOC programs being funded equitably. And so that was really incredible. And I will just say, to get to the second part of the question around, I think it was whether like sort of ERGs can be, was it like divisive? I don't remember the language, but I think what this example that I just shared shows is that centering those who are furthest from the power and the access like doesn't mean we're leaving others behind. It leads to human-centered working spaces where staff thrive and our organizations retain the best talent to be able to achieve all of our missions, water, ocean policy, for us it's wildlife, but it's really been a game changer, the ERG program. And personally, being a Black woman at NWF can be lonely, and it's been a place where I've been able to find community, and one of the reasons why I stay at my organization.
Thank you, Shantae. I know we're just about almost at time. I'm going to ask for somebody if they want to tackle a question on evaluation and accountability. Andreas, I might start with you a little bit. Just because thinking about like, how do we hold ourselves accountable, right? Both as a field and as individual organizations to know that we're making progress and making change.
It is imperative that organizations, foundations are transparent. If organizations, foundations are not transparent, they are doing an injustice to themselves internally, to their staff, to their members, to their volunteers. Organizations must be open, giving everyone around them an ability to see what is actually happening. If organizations don't do this, there is no way to actually evaluate and understand what is happening internally. If organizations are willing to, they're saying to their staff, we value you. We value the idea that we're trying to change and do better and that we're changing culturally. I question a lot when an organization says, we're not going to open these doors. You don't need to know. Staff, it's none of your business. You don't need to get into this. That is a major red flag. And so organizations really just need to do their best to do as much as possible to let their staff in, give staff the resources that they need, and continue to check on staff. And it goes both ways. Staff needs to push leadership because as we've seen recently, when that happens, there are changes. There are consequences to leadership not listening. There are consequences when organizations refuse and turn their back on their own staff. Don't call it a family and say you can only know so much. Organizations have to actually do and follow through with their mission and their values that they put out there. It's not enough just to say they do this, they actually need to do it.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to add to that evaluation question?
I just want to add that. Oh, I'm sorry.
Let's go Quentin, and then Paco, and then Jalan.
Yeah, so I think, to me, if you think about it from an evaluation standpoint, I think you start at it, if you're thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion from a highlighting standpoint, recognizing folks that are doing some things well. Then once you do that, it becomes part of the culture of the organization. And then once you do that, continue that with that process, you have, you have a list of efforts that people have done, right? So it becomes part of the culture. Then you have a benchmark. Then every year you keep rising the standards. And to me, ultimately, you have culture change. So again, I think it talks about, because these things are happening and people are not being recognized and rewarded or highlighted because of that. But once people see other people doing it, and I always use this phrase, people don't know what they don't know, and they start engaging in these efforts, and then all of a sudden they say, hey, I can do this too. And it becomes part of who you are as an organization.
Paco?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Quentin just said. It's exactly that that helps us improve ourselves. We use it in the schools, of course. There's tests. I have 2 young kids. This is the way that we know that they're doing the homework, they're learning the lessons, they're taking input for real. They're not just doing lip service. And so this provides a baseline that we compare and contrast year after year. And we've seen it being not just useful, but then implemented at all levels in the organization. Management.
Jalan?
Yeah, I mean, totally agree with Quentin and Paco. And the only thing that I would add is that whatever metrics or indicators that you're using to track your progress, they should be co-created. Because sometimes folks within institutions might think that they're having impact and they're really not, or they're making it worse. So I think this co-creations of the things that you are going to hold people accountable to or an institution to is super important. I also think, what are the consequences if you don't act or you don't do? I think somebody mentioned consequences, and I feel like, again, coming from the foundation world, what is the cost if we don't do our work differently, if we don't grant make in a different way? So thinking about those consequences, those costs, I think can also drive change. And then, of course, the frequency that we do this type of evaluation is important. So it can't just be, okay, once a year we're checking in to see how we're doing. No, you need to come up with some type of cadence that makes sense and make sure that whatever you're doing is reported out and shared to the people or the communities that you're supposed to be serving, so they can, again, check you on your work as well.
I think you all raised some really important points, including the fact that also evaluation might need to change over time, right? I think of organizations who are very early on in their journey are often doing it by activity or outcome, right? But then the folks who are further along are really managing that culture change, that dynamic, that behavior change that you want to see in both people and organization. And so also think about the evaluation over a time horizon that might change and evolve, but also allow that to happen. Because it's important to realize that you might have lagging indicators, leading indicators, and then eventually predictive indicators, right? And how do you keep pace with that transition over time in a way that keeps your organization moving, right? Because as we say, this work on equity and justice is a journey, right? And it isn't a static moment in time or a static way to evaluate what or how you do. So I'd love to close out this panel with final thoughts and let all of our panelists take a moment to sort of collect what they've heard, and maybe give a closing comment of something that you'd love the audience to take away from this conversation. And I will start first, which is Paco, I'm actually going to pull back on something you mentioned sort of off the cuff, but for me is actually at the heart of this work, which is love. It's something that we often don't talk about in the workplace. It's often something we don't bring up because it feels like one of those things that's like, oh, do I tell people I love them and I think they're amazing at what they do and how do I push them? But that is honestly at the core and the emotional heart of this work on equity and justice. Of like, do I love you? And do you feel loved? And so for me, thinking about when you think about this ocean work, both in the workforce and the people you support, but also the policy then you advance, how are you centering love for the people and nature? And how are you doing that on an ongoing basis? So for me, that is one of the things that I'm taking away from this conversation. Leonard, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. First, I want to thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. I have really enjoyed both this particular day and hearing what everybody else had to say in our preparations for this. The thing that I would ask anybody listening to do would be to make a change, to do something intentional as a result of listening to this conversation or any of the conversations that they're going to hear throughout the CHOW week. Email me, email anybody on this panel. Do something that is specifically tied to something you've learned, something that you want to change. Literally just do something so that there is a sustained progress from this week.
Paco?
I would invite, and I again also want to thank for Chris and her team and team of Meridian for inviting us to this panel. I was part of the advisory committee of this conference, so that was a big step that the National Marine Sanctuaries Foundation did. But it's all about relationships, and relationships don't have to be transactional. They have to be transformational. We have to think about it, again, with our hearts. We have to have our best intentions forward. So that's what I take away, and I hope some of the audience took away from me.
Shantae?
Thanks, Whitney. It's been so amazing to be here today with everyone. Whitney, I was going to say love, so we were on the same page, and I'm not afraid to say love. I will tell all of my panelists, co-panelists that I love you, and everyone who's watching that I love you, and if you're watching the recording, I also love you. So I think the thing that I would add is that this is forever work, and I think some folks already spoke to that. And I like to think of it as like an ever expanding spiral of iterations of learning, changing, and growing. And there's a lot of growth pains, there's a lot of discomfort, and we have to keep doing the work. And doing the work helps us stay in alignment. It helps us learn from our mistakes. It helps us turn conflict into connection. And we can't be free from replicating systems of oppression unless we devote to transformation in all of these spaces. And it's not easy, and we have to do it anyway.
Andreas.
Whitney, you touched on love. I'm going to touch on community, because we need everyone in the ocean community, in the environmental community, in all sorts of communities to work, prioritize this important and critical work of diversity. We can't do it alone at Green 2.0. We need the help of foundations, organizations, Congress, the administration, Green Leadership Trust, all sorts of groups need to come in. We need everyone to say, this needs to change. We can't look at change. We must look at accelerated change if we are to have a brighter, more diverse future. And so I would end with the importance of community.
Thank you, Jalon, and then Quentin, you'll close us out.
So I just want to express sincere gratitude to each and every one of you for what you shared and what you're doing. The thing is, we cannot do this on our own. This is not a singular fight. So to the notion of community and that you don't have to have all the answers, like use the resources, not only in this virtual room, but the resources beyond this room. I really, if it's true community, we help each other. And then I would just say, for those of you in the virtual audience, I hope that you will leave this and write down at least one thing tangibly that you will do as a result of this conversation, and then bring two people along that can not only support you, but hold you accountable. So that's my challenge to all of you.
Quentin?
Yep. So being the last person, I don't want to disappoint and go off course. So I'll say a little bit about community, a little bit about love, but also, continuity, right? And also remember to everybody, on this Zoom, that don't let perfect get in the way of progress. And I think my previous colleague said this, you don't have to have all the answers, and to me, there's a lot of resources out there. And again, there's a lot of folks, amazing folks on this panel, we're all willing to do our part. Thank you.
Thank you all. I am just a level of joy. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for being a part of this. And for all of you at CHOW, thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the good old Capitol Hill Oceans Week and take love to your next night. Take care all.
Thank you.